Hello YouTubers, this is cessnaace back again with another video. In fact, the second video in the series that I rebooted last night on my comic book collection. Now, in the past, I had been showing my comic book collection in batches of 15 per video, whereas now I am showing them in batches of 30 per video. Now, in response to the video that I uploaded last night, McElligott posted a comment to that video in regards to a comic book title that I showed published by Marvel. Supposedly an adaptation of the Stanley Kubrick film 2001: A Space Odyssey. Now, I have issues 2 through 10. Mark had the same curiosity that I did in regards to issue 1, which I don't have. And that is, we could tell that from issue 2 onward, Marvel was not trying at all to follow the events of the film. Did they start off that way, doing their own thing, or did Marvel at least attempt some kind of adaptation of the film with issue 1? So Mark requested that at some point in the future I get a copy of issue number 1 so that I can show it. Well, Mark, being a Patreon supporter, link down in the description box, I went to eBay and I bought a copy of issue number 1 by Jack Kirby. Anyway, going by the covers that I saw for issue 1, they're all identical, but I was looking at several listings. I'm not holding out much hope that issue 1 is going to be a faithful adaptation. However, I wanted to look up the series in this old price guide. Yes, I showed it in the previous video. Nearly 5 years old, but it was new enough for what I needed it for, which was to look up 2001: A Space Odyssey. I found that, well, the series, in fact, ended with issue 10. However, I saw beneath it that there had been a follow-up series. Well, actually, a 2-issue miniseries adapting the film sequel, 2010. Well, the full title, 2010, the year we made contact. I know because I have it on DVD. Anyway, the covers that I found on eBay for it looks like a more faithful adaptation, or at least an attempt at one, than what 2001: A Space Odyssey got. Now, I didn't order that because I was already getting issue 1 of 2001, and as my Patreon supporters know, because I post articles on everything I order, the status of those orders, whether they're processing or paid for, whether they have shipped, or what have you. I mentioned that I was going through and filling the holes that I have in my collection for the comic book adaptations of Anne Rice's novels, published as miniseries, generally 12 issues per series, such as this one, an adaptation of Anne Rice's The Queen of the Damned from Innovation. See, that's issue 5. Goes after issue 4. Now, I've mentioned how much effort I've been putting into sorting through my comic book collection, which as it stands now is a minimum of 19 boxes. My wife kept noticing that I was going from box to box to box to box of comics I had already sorted to see what was in them. She brought me a pad of Post-it notes. I wish I had had this idea. She said, as an example, why don't you just write the letter A on a Post-it note and stick it on a box, whereas all the comics in that box start with the letter A. Aha! In fact, I have 2 such boxes, filled to the brim with comics that start with the letter A. Now, some franchises I have been putting everything into one box. For example, all of the Vampirillas, with the exception of those published by Warren starting in 1969, because those were published in magazine format as opposed to comic book format, so they won't fit in the same boxes as the comic books do. By the way, the most recent issue that I got of Vampirilla, I counted them because it says be sure to look in the back of the book to see the covers for all, to see all of the variant covers. I counted them. 77. A lot of them are exclusive to comic book shops, certain comic book shops, that is, comic book conventions and what have you. So don't look for me to be trying to get all of those, especially 77. And some of them, there were only 10 copies made, so I couldn't afford it, even if I was crazy. Anyway, a box for Vampirillas, a box for all of the Star Treks, regardless of publisher, a box for Doctor Who's, regardless of whether it's from IDW or Titan, etc. A box for all of the Star Wars. I ran into a problem because before Marvel regained the rights to Star Wars, beginning in the late 70s, Marvel acquired the rights to do comic books based on Star Wars, but then they had lost the rights, and the rights went to Dark Horse. Now they're back with Marvel. However, not all of the Dark Horse comics start with the title Star Wars. For example, this one, Classic Star Wars. There is also another series, Classic Star Wars, The Earlier Adventures, or something along those lines, which I thought I pulled, but I guess I didn't. I was trying to decide whether they should go in the Star Wars box or be filed under C. I ultimately decided on filing them under C. Alright, now as I was going through everything, I found a comic that I should have shown yesterday, but I hadn't found it yet. So while the video that I uploaded last night ended with Action Comics, we're going to be picking back up with Action Comics after I show this. An issue of 2000 AD Presents from Quality Comics. I have been finding a lot of Judge Dredd, by the way, published by Eagle and Quality Fleetway and Fleetway and DC in my collection. Anyway, this is not Judge Dredd per se, it's Judge Anderson. I said hands up. That makes me think of a cover I know I've seen on a Judge Dredd comic. I just haven't found it yet, where he's got a gun and on the page is printed bang, bang, as in he shot the gun twice, and then he yells freeze. So he yells freeze after he's shot at the perpetrators. As I mentioned in the previous video, while the Eagle comics that were released in the US were printed in the United States, the quality run were printed in Spain. At least the other one I showed was, and this one was too. Printed in Spain by JTV Publishing Services. Okay, picking up where we left off last time with Action Comics. Issue 785. I generally prefer to have an entire series before I start reading issues, but obviously that's never going to happen with Action Comics. The same goes for Detective Comics, Walt Disney's Comics and Stories, all these really long-running series. It's never going to happen. But I do prefer to get long runs before I start reading a story. However, this is issue 785, and the next issue I have is 787. And yes, by this point, I was buying them new at a comic book shop. Issue 789. $7.91. The Shame of Smallville. I wonder what that could be. Whoops. I don't think that hit the microphone. And I only have one issue left, because even before I stopped going to comic book shops, I now get all of my new comics from Things from Another World. But even before I stopped going to comic book shops, I stopped buying Action Comics. This is from '07, so I'm considerably behind. Issue 847 of Action Comics. Speaking of Things from Another World, whenever I get comics in from them, I show them to my Patreon supporters. I've got about 15 now, so when I have enough to do an entire video like this of the recent publications that I have purchased from Things from Another World, I will of course do that. This is from Western Publishing Company, which had 2 imprints, Gold Key and Whitman. The interiors were identical. Everything on the cover identical, except for the imprint, which in this case is Whitman. Now, I know there are some collectors that do not prefer the Whitmans, they prefer the Gold Keys. I guess it's a regional thing. You'll notice that this comic combines artwork with photographs. This is something that Western Publishing did, although sometimes they used just photos on their covers, which is why they're called photo covers. Now, I know I mentioned this before, but the main problem with collecting these comics is that they never print the issue number on the cover. You have to read the indices to find that. And it says number 5 down there. What item 12? What item 12? 211 in progress. What item 12? Handle code 3. Yes, I did watch that series a lot. Anyway, the comic book shop I bought this from had a habit of printing issue numbers for Gold Keys and Whitmans on the back of the backing boards. So that is a habit I have continued. Now, Western Publishing's main rival, I don't think they focus too much on competing with Marvel and DC. In fact, Western Publishing sold their comics in grab bags a lot of the times, and they became so successful at that Marvel hired them to do the same thing for them, and I believe DC did as well. Their main competitor, Western Publishing, was Charlton Publications, which they themselves had 2 imprints, Charlton and Modern. Charlton and Modern. So it was a competition of who can get what license. While Western Publishing got Adam 12, for example, Charlton got Emergency. I have some issues of Emergency, but they're in the magazine format, so the interior pages are in black and white. Everything that I have that's in magazine format is in black and white on the inside. Whitman's. Not Whitman. Warren's, Charlton's, and Marvel's. I'm pretty sure I have some Marvel Howard the Ducks with interior pages that are in black and white. But anyway, I have some Charlton's of Space 1999 and Emergency, where the interior pages are in black and white in magazine format. However, the comic book format had interior pages in color. I don't know if Emergency even had, if Emergency was even released in standard size. Space 1999 was, because I have several issues of that, and the interior pages are in color. Okay. Emergency. Well, they don't specify. Yes, they do. There were 4 issues in standard comic book size. Magazine size, there were 4 issues. Hey, those are expensive. Anyway. Moving on to Adventure Comics, issue 7. This is the only issue I have. Now, back during the boom era of the 80s, this is a publisher that was cranking out a lot of titles. Blackthorne Publishing. This is issue 1 of Adventures in the Mistwood. As was standard for them, the cover is in color. The interior pages, black and white. Now, when I was growing up, it wasn't just Gold Keys and Whitmans and Charlatans for me. I also bought Archie's and Harvey's. Harvey, at some point, ceased publication. But then in the 80s, they attempted to come back using the imprint Harvey Classics. None of what they published under that banner was original material. It was all reprints. This is issue 1 of The Adventures of Felix the Cat. However, going through my collection, I have discovered that I have more Harveys than I remembered having. Okay, issue 15 of The Adventures of Superboy. Issue 445 of The Adventures of Superman. Issue 598 of The Adventures of Superman. Issue 643, which is the final issue for me of this title. Now, this particular series I started buying for my youngest daughter, who's now 20. Anyway, she likes this show, and so I started getting the comics for her, and she likes the comics. But somehow I wound up getting a duplicate copy of this issue, issue 56 from Kaboom of Adventure Time. Now, I'm running low on bags and boards. In fact, I've ordered quite a few, which have yet to arrive. Anyway, this is Afterlife with Archie, issue 9. The whole reason I brought up the fact that I'm running low on bags and boards is because I have 2 copies of this issue. And what I've done is put the other copy in with this copy. They're both protected in a bag. They both have they have an acid-free backing board in the middle, so I figure I should be good to go. Issue 10. Okay, this is issue 3 of Age of Apocalypse. Okay, from Radio Comics. I mentioned in a video that's no longer up how I lost issue 1 of this series. This is issue 2 of Aaliyah from Radio Comics. Last time I went to their site, they were selling issue 1 for 99 cents, but I need to cool it on my purchases for another week or two. If I remember correctly, This series only has 2 issues. No, I'm not going to show that again. Just basically, he's alive and selling comic books now. Okay, this series was published by Eclipse on a bi-weekly basis. This is issue 10 of Airboy. Issue 13. And the last one in my collection, issue 23. Alright, cooperate with me. Keep fighting colds. Whoops. And coordination. Alright, from Dark Horse Comics. This is a 3-issue miniseries. Acanero. This is issue 1. Issue 2. And issue 3. Now from Marvel. Issue 25 of Alf. Issue 26. '27. And we leap to 48. Issue 49, which was the next to last issue. And as it has worked out, the final comic for this video, issue 50. All right. As I mentioned before, link to Patreon/cessnaace is in the description box, as is a list of my Patreon supporters. And also, if you would consider subscribing, I would appreciate it, because I'm still losing subscribers. I lost 3 more since last night. And I don't know why, because the video that I uploaded last night is getting just as many views, or got as many views so far, as my video game videos. So until next time, stay awesome.